The business card landed in the trash with a hollow click as Jennifer Walsh turned away from the sleek glass counter, her manicured fingers dismissing what she assumed was another fake tech startup CEO. She had no idea she'd just thrown away the identity of the woman who controlled every digital heartbeat of their billion-dollar bank. Maya Richardson stood perfectly still in the marble lobby of Metropolitan Trust Bank, her simple navy blazer concealing a quiet authority that would soon reshape everything these walls contained. The morning sun cast long shadows through the towering glass windows of Metropolitan Trust Bank's flagship branch on Peachtree Street, downtown Atlanta. The polished marble floors gleamed under harsh fluorescent lighting, creating an atmosphere of cold corporate perfection that made even the wealthy clientele speak in hushed, reverent tones. This was a temple to money, where every surface whispered of power and privilege, and where the wrong kind of person could feel their worth dissolving with each step across the intimidating expanse. Maya Richardson pushed through the heavy glass doors at exactly 10:47 a.m., her modest heels clicking softly against the stone floor. At 29, she possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was, even when the world around her seemed determined to see someone else entirely. Her navy blazer was pressed but unremarkable, her laptop bag worn but functional, and her natural hair pulled back in a simple style that spoke of efficiency over fashion. To the casual observer, she looked like any number of young professionals who might wander into the bank, perhaps an administrative assistant running errands, or maybe a small business owner hoping for a loan. She approached the customer service counter, where Jennifer Walsh sat behind bulletproof glass, her blonde hair arranged in elaborate waves that had clearly required significant time and expense to achieve. Jennifer's pristine white blouse bore not a single wrinkle, and her manicured nails caught the light as she typed with practiced efficiency. The nameplate before her read Senior Customer Relations Specialist in gold lettering that seemed to glow with self-importance. Maya waited patiently, watching as Jennifer's fingers danced across the keyboard without once lifting her eyes from the screen. Seconds stretched into a full minute, then two, the silence growing more pronounced with each passing moment. When a well-dressed white gentleman in an expensive suit entered the lobby, Jennifer's demeanor transformed instantly. Her face lit up with a warm professional smile as she rose from her chair with obvious enthusiasm. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," she chirped, her voice carrying the kind of warmth typically reserved for valued clients. "How wonderful to see you again. Are you here for your usual quarterly portfolio review?" Maya remained standing at the counter, her presence seemingly invisible, despite being there first. She watched this exchange with growing awareness of the familiar pattern unfolding before her, a dance of recognition and dismissal she had witnessed countless times throughout her career. When Mr. Patterson completed his business and departed with hearty thanks and promises to "give my regards to your supervisor," Jennifer finally reluctantly acknowledged Maya's existence. Yes, the single word carried the weight of irritation, as if Maya's presence were an inconvenience rather than an opportunity for business. "Good morning," Maya replied, her voice steady and professional. "I need to process a wire transfer for my company. I have all the necessary documentation." Jennifer's eyes swept over Maya's appearance with unconcealed skepticism, taking in the simple blazer, the functional laptop bag, and the absence of obvious wealth markers that would typically command respect in this marble cathedral of finance. Her expression shifted from mild irritation to active suspicion. "What kind of company?" Jennifer asked, her tone suggesting she already doubted whatever answer she might receive. "Richardson Cyber. I'm the founder and CEO." Maya reached into her bag and withdrew a business card, placing it carefully on the counter between them. Jennifer picked up the card with 2 fingers, as if it might contaminate her perfectly manicured hands. She studied it for a moment, her lips curling into what might charitably be called a smile but looked more like a sneer. Then, without warning, she opened her hand and let the card fall directly into the wastebasket beside her desk. The hollow click of plastic hitting metal seemed to echo through the suddenly silent lobby, a sound that marked the exact moment when professional courtesy died and something far more sinister took its place. Maya Richardson had built Richardson Cyber from nothing more than a second-hand laptop and an unshakable belief that cybersecurity shouldn't be a luxury reserved for Fortune 500 companies. 3 years earlier, Working from a cramped studio apartment in East Atlanta, she had written her first algorithm, a breakthrough in predictive threat detection that could identify potential security breaches before they happened. The code was elegant in its simplicity, revolutionary in its application, and born from countless 18-hour days fueled by determination and instant coffee. Her breakthrough had come during a particularly devastating ransomware attack on several small businesses in the Atlanta area. While established cybersecurity firms charged exorbitant fees for basic protection, Maya had worked pro bono to help these businesses recover, developing innovative solutions that cost a fraction of traditional security measures. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community of Black-owned businesses, then expanded to government contractors who valued both her expertise and her commitment to ethical pricing. The federal contract that brought her to Metropolitan Trust Bank today represented the culmination of everything she had worked toward. The Department of Homeland Security had selected Richardson Cyber to implement a comprehensive cybersecurity overhaul for federal financial institutions, a $1.8 billion project that would establish new standards for digital security across the entire banking industry. Maya's algorithms would protect everything from small credit unions to major investment banks, creating an interconnected web of security that could adapt and respond to threats in real time. What made this moment particularly ironic was that Metropolitan Trust Bank wasn't just any financial institution on her client list. They were her primary banking partner and, unbeknownst to Jennifer Walsh, entirely dependent on Maya's existing security protocols for their digital infrastructure. Every transaction processed through their servers, every customer login verified through their online banking platform, every wire transfer approved through their internal systems relied on code that Maya had personally written and continuously updated. She had chosen Metropolitan Trust Bank precisely because of their reputation for handling high-value government contracts. Their marketing materials boasted of cutting-edge digital security and world-class cybersecurity partnerships. What they failed to mention was that their cutting-edge security came from a 29-year-old black woman working out of a modest office space in Virginia Highland, someone who could walk into their flagship branch and be treated like she didn't belong. Maya's laptop bag contained more than just paperwork for today's wire transfer. Inside were encrypted drives holding the master keys to Metropolitan Trust's entire digital ecosystem, backup codes, administrative access protocols, and system vulnerabilities that she monitored and patched on a daily basis. She carried, quite literally, the power to protect or expose every digital secret the bank possessed. Standing in that marble lobby, watching her business card disappear into Jennifer's wastebasket, Maya felt the familiar sting of being underestimated. It was a sensation she had experienced throughout her career. In venture capital meetings, where investors assumed she was the assistant rather than the founder. In tech conferences where she was consistently mistaken for marketing staff. In client presentations where decision-makers directed their questions to her white male employees despite her being the primary architect of every solution they discussed. But Maya had learned long ago that being underestimated could be a powerful advantage. While others made assumptions based on her appearance, age, or gender, she quietly built systems that protected billions of dollars in assets and kept critical infrastructure secure from increasingly sophisticated threats. Her reputation in cybersecurity circles was legendary, even if her face wasn't recognizable to bank tellers who judged expertise by the price of someone's handbag. She had driven 43 minutes through Atlanta traffic to reach this branch, navigating construction zones and morning rush-hour congestion, carrying documentation for a wire transfer that would fund the next phase of her government contract. What she hadn't expected was to become a case study in institutional bias, though perhaps she should have anticipated it given her previous experiences in corporate America. The silence that followed the disposal of Maya's business card seemed to stretch endlessly, punctuated only by the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant murmur of other customers conducting their business with appropriate deference. Maya stood perfectly still, her expression unchanged, though something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere around her. The casual disrespect had crossed a line that transformed this from a simple banking transaction into something far more significant. Jennifer Walsh appeared pleased with herself, settling back into her chair with the satisfied air of someone who had successfully dispatched an annoyance. She turned her attention back to her computer screen, fingers resuming their rhythmic tapping, as if Maya had simply evaporated from existence. The message was clear. People like Maya weren't worth the courtesy of professional acknowledgement, let alone actual service. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice carrying the same professional tone despite the obvious slight. "I still need to process that wire transfer." Jennifer's typing paused momentarily before she looked up with exaggerated surprise, as if she had genuinely forgotten Maya's presence. "I'm sorry, but as I mentioned, we'll need proper documentation for any business transactions. Your card didn't look particularly official." The emphasis on card carried unmistakable contempt, while her eyes performed another dismissive sweep of Maya's appearance. The implication hung heavy in the air. Someone dressed like Maya couldn't possibly represent a legitimate technology company, let alone one capable of conducting million-dollar transactions. Maya reached into her laptop bag and withdrew a leather portfolio containing the wire transfer documentation, federal contract excerpts, and Richardson Cyber's corporate banking information. She placed it carefully on the counter, her movements deliberate and controlled. "All the necessary documentation is here. The transfer amount is $1, $8 billion, and I have the federal authorization codes." Jennifer's eyebrows shot up at the mention of the amount, though her expression suggested disbelief rather than respect. She made no move to examine the portfolio, instead leaning back in her chair as if Maya had just claimed to be royalty. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion here. Transactions of that magnitude require executive approval and extensive verification processes. Perhaps you should speak with someone at a different institution, maybe a community bank that specializes in smaller business needs." The suggestion carried layers of coded language that Maya recognized immediately. Community bank was corporate speak for somewhere more appropriate for people like you, while smaller business needs translated to, "We don't believe you belong here." It was discrimination wrapped in professional courtesy, bias disguised as helpful guidance. Other customers in the lobby had begun to notice the exchange, their conversations dropping to whispers as they stole glances at the young black woman being so obviously dismissed by bank staff. Maya could feel their curious stares, some sympathetic, others judgmental, all contributing to her growing awareness that this moment would be remembered by everyone present. At that moment, Michael Barnes emerged from his corner office, drawn by what appeared to be a developing situation at the customer service counter. His perfectly pressed suit and authoritative bearing marked him immediately as senior management, someone accustomed to resolving problems efficiently and quietly. His nameplate read Branch Manager, in the same gold lettering that seemed to mark territory throughout the bank. "Is everything all right here, Jennifer?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer and was prepared to support whatever decision his employee had made. Jennifer straightened in her chair, suddenly animated by the arrival of backup. "This young lady is claiming she needs to process a billion-dollar wire transfer, but her documentation appears questionable. I was suggesting she might be better served elsewhere." Michael's eyes fixed on Maya with the practiced assessment of someone trained to identify potential problems before they escalated. His gaze took in her modest appearance, her age, her race, and her gender, processing this information through filters shaped by decades of assumptions about who belonged in spaces like this and who did not. "I see," he said slowly, his tone carrying the weight of authority and the subtle implication that Jennifer's assessment was correct. Michael Barnes approached the counter with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the final word in any dispute. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit immaculate, and his manner suggested that years of banking experience had given him the ability to assess any situation quickly and accurately. Unfortunately for Maya, his assessment process appeared to rely heavily on visual cues that had nothing to do with actual creditworthiness or business legitimacy. "Miss," he began, clearly expecting Maya to provide her name as if she were applying for his approval rather than requesting standard banking services. "Richardson, Maya Richardson, CEO of Richardson Cyber." She maintained her professional composure despite the growing absurdity of the situation. "I need to process a federal wire transfer for $1, $8 billion, and I have all required documentation." Michael's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: disbelief, amusement, and finally settling on patronizing concern. He glanced at Jennifer, who responded with a knowing look that confirmed his initial skepticism. This silent communication spoke volumes about the institutional culture that allowed such moments to unfold without question. "Ms. Richardson," Michael said, adopting the tone typically reserved for explaining complex concepts to children, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but transactions of this magnitude require extensive verification processes, corporate guarantees, and executive oversight. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding about the actual amount." The condescension was breathtaking in its audacity. Maya held out the leather portfolio containing federal contracts, banking authorizations, and corporate documentation that would have immediately validated her claims if anyone had bothered to examine them. Instead, Michael gave the portfolio the same dismissive glance that Jennifer had given her business card. "Sir, if you would simply review the documentation," Maya began, but Michael cut her off with a raised hand. "Ma'am, I've been in banking for 23 years, and I can assure you that billion-dollar transfers don't walk through our front door carried by—" He paused, clearly searching for diplomatic language to express his doubts without stating them explicitly. "Let's just say that clients conducting business at this level typically arrange meetings through their existing relationship managers." The implication was crystal clear. People who looked like Maya didn't conduct business at this level, period. The assumption was so ingrained in his worldview that examining her documentation seemed unnecessary, even absurd. Why waste time reviewing papers that couldn't possibly be legitimate? Maya felt the familiar burn of institutional racism, the particular frustration that came from being prejudged by people who considered themselves too professional to be racist while simultaneously embodying every aspect of systemic bias. She had encountered this countless times before, but the stakes had never been quite this high, nor the irony quite this profound. "Mr. Barnes," she said, her voice remaining steady despite the mounting pressure, "I understand your need for verification. However, I assure you that Richardson Cyber is a legitimate federal contractor with existing relationships at this institution. Perhaps you could simply run our account information through your system." Michael exchanged another glance with Jennifer, this one carrying a hint of impatience. He clearly wanted this situation resolved quickly and quietly, preferably with Maya's departure from the premises. "Ms. Richardson, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe in honest communication. This branch serves a very specific clientele, and we have protocols in place for good reason. I think you would be better served by one of our community banking locations, where the staff is more accustomed to handling varied business needs." The phrase varied business needs was the final insult, a euphemism so transparent that it barely qualified as coded language. Maya realized in that moment that no amount of documentation would change their minds, because their resistance wasn't based on procedure or policy. It was based on the fundamental belief that someone like her simply couldn't be who she claimed to be. "I understand," Maya said quietly, gathering her portfolio and laptop bag. "Thank you for making your position so clear." As she turned toward the exit, her voice carried just loud enough for Michael and Jennifer to hear. "You might want to remember this conversation, Mr. Barnes. I have a feeling it will become quite important very soon." The marble lobby of Metropolitan Trust Bank had gradually filled with the usual mid-morning clientele. Executives in expensive suits conducting quarterly reviews, elderly couples managing retirement portfolios, and young professionals opening accounts or applying for mortgages. What should have been routine banking business had transformed into an uncomfortable theater of discrimination, with Maya Richardson as the unwilling centerpiece of a drama that was unfolding in real time. Mrs. Patricia Caldwell, a 72-year-old widow who had banked at Metropolitan Trust for over 3 decades, watched the exchange from her position in the comfortable seating area reserved for premium clients. She had witnessed Jennifer's dismissive treatment of the young black woman from the beginning, noting the stark contrast between the warm greeting afforded to Mr. Patterson and the cold indifference shown to someone who appeared equally professional. Mrs. Caldwell's discomfort grew with each passing minute, her decades of social conditioning warring with an increasingly strong sense that something deeply wrong was occurring. Near the investment consultation booths, David Kim, a 35-year-old startup founder, found himself unable to focus on his portfolio review as the situation at the customer service counter escalated. He had built his own technology company from scratch and recognized something familiar in Maya's calm persistence, the particular kind of determination that came from knowing your worth while watching others underestimate it completely. His financial advisor continued discussing market projections, but David's attention remained fixed on the unfolding discrimination. Jennifer Walsh had become increasingly animated as the situation progressed, emboldened by her manager's support and seemingly unaware that her behavior was being observed and judged by everyone present. She whispered commentary to her colleague Rachel Stevens at the adjacent workstation, their shared glances and barely suppressed smirks creating a bubble of complicity that felt toxic in the otherwise professional environment. "Can you believe she actually claimed it was for almost $2 billion? Jennifer murmured, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "I mean, look at her bag. It's not even leather. Real CEOs don't carry computer bags that look like they came from a college bookstore." Rachel nodded enthusiastically, her own prejudices validated by Jennifer's confidence. "Right. And did you see how she hesitated when Mr. Barnes asked for her relationship manager? Probably doesn't even have one because she's never actually banked here before." Their conversation carried across the lobby's marble expanse, creating an uncomfortable awareness among other customers that they were witnessing something that went far beyond standard banking procedures. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others pulled out their phones, some to avoid engagement, others to discreetly document what was becoming an increasingly obvious case of discriminatory treatment. Marcus Thompson, a 41-year-old civil rights attorney who had stopped by to make a deposit before court, found himself taking mental notes of everything he observed. The dismissive body language, the failure to examine documentation, the coded language about community banking, it all painted a clear picture of institutional bias that he had seen countless times in his legal practice. He began discreetly recording audio on his phone, his legal instincts recognizing potential evidence when he saw it. Maya's composure throughout the ordeal had become a source of both admiration and concern for those watching. Her refusal to raise her voice, lose her temper, or abandon her professional demeanor in the face of such obvious disrespect spoke to a strength that many found inspiring. At the same time, the very fact that she needed to maintain such control while being treated so poorly highlighted the impossible standards often applied to people of color in professional settings. When Maya finally gathered her materials and prepared to leave, the lobby felt electric with tension. Her parting words to Michael Barnes, the quiet promise that this conversation would become important very soon, hung in the air like a challenge that everyone present somehow understood would be answered. Mrs. Caldwell found herself rising from her chair as Maya passed, their eyes meeting briefly in a moment of unexpected connection. The older woman's slight nod conveyed both apology and encouragement, a silent acknowledgement that what had just occurred was wrong and that Maya's dignity throughout the ordeal had not gone unnoticed. As Maya Richardson walked through the glass doors of Metropolitan Trust Bank and into the bright Atlanta sunshine, her mind drifted back to the moment that had brought her to this point, a conversation that had taken place in this very building just 18 months earlier, in a boardroom 30 floors above where she had just been dismissed. The memory was crystal clear. She had sat at an enormous conference table surrounded by Metropolitan Trust's senior executives, including Regional Vice President Sarah Chen, Chief Technology Officer Robert Martinez, and Chief Information Security Officer Linda Brooks. The meeting had been the culmination of a competitive selection process that had taken nearly 6 months, during which Richardson Cyber had competed against cybersecurity giants like IBM, Cisco, and Palantir for the most lucrative contract in the bank's history. Maya had arrived at that meeting in her best suit, carrying the same laptop bag that Jennifer Walsh had mocked today, though its contents then had included detailed presentations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The executives had been skeptical initially. Her company was barely 2 years old, and she was competing against firms with decades of experience and thousands of employees. But when Maya began demonstrating her proprietary threat detection algorithms, the room's energy had shifted dramatically. "This is remarkable," Robert Martinez had said, leaning forward as Maya's software identified 17 potential vulnerabilities in their existing system within minutes. "Your AI can predict attack vectors we haven't even considered. How is this possible? Maya had explained her breakthrough in predictive cybersecurity, algorithms that learned from patterns across multiple institutions to identify threats before they materialized. Unlike traditional security systems that responded to attacks, her technology prevented them by recognizing the digital signatures of preparation phases that preceded major breaches. The key, she had explained to the fascinated executives, is understanding that modern cybercriminals follow behavioral patterns just like any other profession. My algorithms identify these patterns across seemingly unrelated data points, creating a predictive model that's proven 94% accurate in preventing major financial cyber attacks. Sarah Chen had been particularly impressed by Maya's innovative approach to banking-specific threats. Most cybersecurity firms treat all industries the same way, she had noted, but you've clearly spent time understanding the unique vulnerabilities of financial institutions. These solutions are specifically designed for our challenges. The contract they had ultimately signed gave Richardson Cyber unprecedented access to Metropolitan Trust's digital infrastructure. Maya's team didn't just install security software, they became integrated into the bank's daily operations, monitoring everything from customer login attempts to internal employee access patterns. Her algorithms protected not just Metropolitan Trust, but also provided security services to a network of affiliated credit unions and smaller banks throughout the Southeast. What made today's discrimination particularly galling was that Maya wasn't just any cybersecurity contractor. She was Metropolitan Trust's most critical technology partner. Every digital transaction processed through their systems relied on her code. Every customer who logged into online banking was protected by algorithms she had personally written. Every wire transfer, including the billion-dollar transactions that Michael Barnes claimed required such careful oversight, was secured by Richardson Cyber's proprietary encryption protocols. The federal contract that had brought her to the bank today was actually an expansion of her existing relationship with Metropolitan Trust. The Department of Homeland Security had selected her company to implement a nationwide cybersecurity network for financial institutions, using Metropolitan Trust as the pilot program due to their existing successful partnership with Richardson Cyber. Maya's laptop bag contained not just documentation for today's wire transfer, but also administrative access codes that could shut down Metropolitan Trust's entire digital infrastructure. She carried backup protocols, emergency contact procedures, and system vulnerabilities that she monitored and patched on a continuous basis. In many ways, she knew the bank's digital systems better than their own IT department because she had designed most of them from scratch. Standing on the sidewalk outside the building, Maya realized that Jennifer Walsh and Michael Barnes had just discriminated against the one person who kept their institution digitally secure. The irony was almost too profound to process. They had dismissed their own cybersecurity architect based on assumptions about her appearance, age, and race. It was time to remind them exactly who Maya Richardson was and what Richardson Cyber meant to their continued existence. Maya had barely reached her car in the parking garage beneath Metropolitan Trust Bank when her phone began buzzing with notifications. Word of her encounter had somehow already begun to spread through Atlanta's tight-knit business community, carried by witnesses who had recognized the injustice they had observed and felt compelled to document it. David Kim, the startup founder who had watched the entire exchange, had posted a carefully worded Twitter thread about witnessing shocking discrimination at a major Atlanta bank, while Mrs. Caldwell had called her grandson, a local news producer, to report what she described as the most appalling display of prejudice I've seen in decades. But Maya's immediate concern was a missed call from her senior security analyst, James Crawford, whose voicemail carried an edge of urgency that made her stomach tighten. She called back immediately, still sitting in her car in the fluorescent-lit garage. "Maya, thank God," James answered on the first ring. "We've got a situation. Metropolitan Trust System is flagging your access credentials as potentially compromised. Their automated security protocols are questioning why your administrative access attempted to log in from their physical location this morning without prior authorization." The irony was breathtaking. Maya's own security algorithms, designed to protect Metropolitan Trust from insider threats and unauthorized access, had been triggered by her physical presence in the bank. The system she had created to safeguard their operations was now treating her like a potential security risk because she had attempted to conduct legitimate business in person rather than through the usual digital channels. Their IT department is in full panic mode, James continued. They're running emergency security scans and have temporarily suspended several automated systems. Linda Brooks has been calling our office every 15 minutes, demanding to speak with you about a potential breach. Maya closed her eyes, processing the escalating absurdity of the situation. While Jennifer Walsh and Michael Barnes had been dismissing her as an unqualified fraud, their own security systems were alerting them to the presence of their most critical technology partner. The very algorithms that protected their billions in assets were screaming warnings about her proximity to their infrastructure, warnings that their cybersecurity team was too panicked to properly interpret. "There's more," James added, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been monitoring their internal communications, which we're contractually authorized to do for security purposes, and there's some concerning chatter about suspicious individuals attempting to access executive banking services. Someone named Michael Barnes has flagged your attempted wire transfer as a potential fraud attempt and has instructed all staff to be on high alert for similar schemes." The situation had now crossed from discriminatory customer service into active interference with Richardson Cyber's federal contract obligations. Maya's wire transfer wasn't just a business transaction. It was a critical component of implementing cybersecurity protocols for the Department of Homeland Security. Any delay could jeopardize national security infrastructure and potentially void contracts worth billions of dollars. Maya's phone rang again, this time displaying the number for Metropolitan Trust's executive offices. She recognized the extension as belonging to Sarah Chen, the regional vice president, who had personally signed their original cybersecurity contract. Maya let the call go to voicemail, then listened to the increasingly frantic message. "Maya, this is Sarah Chen. We have a critical security situation and need to speak with you immediately. Our systems are showing unusual access patterns, and there may have been an attempted breach. Please call me back as soon as possible. This is a code red alert." The perfect storm was now complete. Maya had been discriminated against by frontline staff who didn't recognize their own cybersecurity architect. Her attempts to conduct legitimate business had triggered the very security protocols she had designed, and now the bank's executives were treating her as both a potential threat and their only salvation. Sitting in the parking garage beneath the building where she had just been humiliated, Maya realized that the next few hours would determine not just her relationship with Metropolitan Trust Bank, but potentially the entire future of her company and the federal contracts that depended on this partnership. It was time to return to Metropolitan Trust Bank, but this time she wouldn't be asking for permission to conduct her business. Maya Richardson sat in her car for exactly 7 minutes, watching the digital clock on her dashboard tick forward while she made a series of strategic decisions that would reshape everything about to unfold. Her first call was to her assistant, Christina Park, with instructions to cancel all afternoon meetings and prepare what she privately called the nuclear option, a comprehensive presentation that documented Richardson Cyber's complete integration into Metropolitan Trust's infrastructure. "Christina, I need you to compile everything," Maya said, her voice carrying a calm authority that her assistant recognized as Maya's most dangerous mode. "Every contract, every security protocol, every system integration, every vulnerability assessment we've conducted for Metropolitan Trust over the past 18 months, I want a complete picture of exactly how dependent they are on our services." Her second call was to her attorney, Marcus Williams of Williams & Associates, who specialized in discrimination cases against financial institutions. She needed legal documentation of today's events, not because she intended to file a lawsuit, but because she wanted Metropolitan Trust's executives to understand the severity of their employees' actions and the potential consequences of institutional bias. "Marcus, I need a consultation immediately. I've just been discriminated against by a client's frontline staff, and it's about to become a very expensive problem for everyone involved." Her third and most important call was to Linda Brooks, Metropolitan Trust's Chief Information Security Officer, the one person in the building who would immediately understand the implications of Maya's treatment and the security alerts currently panicking their IT department. "Linda, this is Maya Richardson. Before you say anything, I need you to understand that I am currently sitting in your parking garage after being refused service by your branch staff. Yes, I am the suspicious individual who triggered your security alerts. And yes, the potential fraud your branch manager flagged is actually our federal wire transfer for the DHS contract. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Linda's voice exploded through the speaker. Maya, what the hell are you talking about? Why would our branch staff refuse service to you? Don't they know who you are? That's exactly the point, Linda. They don't know who I am because they made assumptions based on my appearance. Your teller threw my business card in the trash, and your branch manager suggested I try a community bank that specializes in varied business needs. Maya could hear Linda's sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like someone dropping a coffee mug. As Chief Information Security Officer, Linda understood better than anyone how catastrophic it would be to alienate Richardson Cyber, especially in the middle of implementing federal security protocols. Maya, please tell me you're joking. Please tell me that Michael Barnes did not just discriminate against our primary cybersecurity contractor, while our systems are screaming alerts about your presence in the building. I'm afraid that's exactly what happened. And Linda, there's something else you need to know. Your security algorithms have flagged this incident in ways that are about to create problems you haven't even considered yet. Maya explained how her attempted wire transfer had triggered multiple security protocols, how the denial of service had been logged as a potential fraud prevention success, and how the timing coincided with critical federal compliance deadlines that could void their government contracts. Linda, I'm going to give you 30 minutes to resolve this situation internally before I take it to Sarah Chen and the federal contract administrators. But I want you to understand something clearly. This isn't just about customer service anymore. Your employees have just interfered with national security infrastructure implementation, and that has consequences that go far beyond hurt feelings. The silence that followed was the sound of a senior executive realizing that her institution's unconscious bias had just collided with business reality in the most expensive way possible. Maya, Linda said finally, her voice tight with controlled panic, what do you need me to do? I need Michael Barnes and Jennifer Walsh in a conference room in 1 hour, along with you, Sarah Chen, and whoever else you think should witness what happens next. And Linda, you might want to review the security footage from this morning's lobby interactions before that meeting. Maya ended the call and began the walk back toward the building, her laptop bag containing not just the documentation they had refused to examine, but also the digital keys to their entire cybersecurity infrastructure. Maya Richardson returned to Metropolitan Trust Bank at precisely 2:30 p.m., but this time, everything about her approach was different. Gone was the understated professional attire that had made her invisible to Jennifer Walsh and Michael Barnes. In its place was a sharply tailored charcoal suit that spoke of executive authority, paired with heels that clicked against the marble floor with unmistakable confidence. Her natural hair was styled in a sleek updo that highlighted her professional bearing, and she carried a leather briefcase that clearly cost more than most people's monthly salary. But the most significant transformation wasn't visual. It was the presence that preceded her through the glass doors. Maya walked with the quiet authority of someone who owned the room before entering it, who commanded respect through competence rather than demanding it through volume. This was Maya Richardson in her full professional power, no longer allowing others to define her worth through their limited perspectives. The lobby's atmosphere shifted the moment she appeared. Jennifer Walsh, still at her customer service station, looked up from her computer screen and felt something cold settle in her stomach. There was something unmistakably familiar about this elegant black woman approaching her counter, something that triggered a memory she couldn't quite place, but that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "Good afternoon," Maya said, her voice carrying the same professional courtesy as before, but now backed by an unmistakable edge of authority. "I believe you were expecting me." Jennifer's eyes widened as recognition dawned. This was the same woman she had dismissed just 4 hours earlier, the woman whose business card she had contemptuously tossed in the trash. But the transformation was so complete that for a moment Jennifer wondered if she had made some terrible mistake about who she had been dealing with. Excuse me?" Jennifer stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating as she processed the implications of Maya's return and dramatic transformation. "My name is Maya Richardson, CEO of Richardson Cyber. This morning you threw my business card in the trash and suggested I find a community bank better suited to my needs. I'm here to discuss how that decision has affected Metropolitan Trust's cybersecurity infrastructure and federal contract compliance. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, each syllable carrying weight that made Jennifer's hands tremble as she reached for her phone to call Michael Barnes. Around the lobby, the same customers who had witnessed the morning's discrimination began to understand that they were about to witness something unprecedented, the moment when institutional bias collided with business reality. Michael Barnes emerged from his office with the confident stride of someone who believed he was handling a routine follow-up to an earlier problem customer. His expression suggested he expected to resolve whatever misunderstanding had brought Maya back to the bank, perhaps with a brief explanation of their policies and a polite but firm suggestion that she conduct her business elsewhere. That confidence lasted exactly until he saw Maya's transformation and the calm authority in her bearing. Something in her posture, her attire, and the calculated precision of her movements suggested someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms rather than requesting basic banking services. "Mr. Barnes," Maya said, her voice carrying the same professional courtesy as before, but now backed by an unmistakable edge of executive authority. "I believe Linda Brooks is expecting us in Conference Room A. There are some urgent matters regarding Metropolitan Trust's cybersecurity infrastructure that require immediate attention." Michael's confusion was palpable as he processed her words. How did this woman know Linda Brooks, the Chief Information Security Officer? How did she know about Conference Room A, which was typically reserved for the bank's most sensitive executive meetings? And why was she speaking with the casual familiarity of someone who had every right to call such meetings? Before Michael could formulate a coherent response, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Linda Brooks emerged with the urgent stride of someone responding to a critical situation. Behind her followed Sarah Chen, the regional vice president, her expression grave and focused in a way that suggested the next few minutes would determine the future of several careers. "Maya," Linda said, approaching with obvious relief mixed with apprehension, "thank you for coming back. We have a situation that requires your immediate expertise and clarification." Michael Barnes watched this exchange with mounting bewilderment. The Chief Information Security Officer was addressing this woman, the same woman he had dismissed as unsuitable for executive banking services just hours earlier, with the deference typically reserved for the bank's most critical partners. Sarah Chen, whose approval he needed for every significant decision, was regarding Maya Richardson with unmistakable respect and what appeared to be genuine concern about her earlier treatment. Jennifer Walsh, who had been summoned from her customer service station, stood frozen near the elevator doors, watching her morning's confident dismissal of a fake CEO transform into what was clearly becoming a career-defining catastrophe. The business card she had thrown away with such contempt now seemed to glow with significance she had been too blind to recognize. "Perhaps," Sarah Chen suggested, her voice carrying the controlled urgency of damage control, "we should move this conversation to a more private setting where we can address the complexities of this situation appropriately." Maya nodded once, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both acceptance and the implicit understanding that the next hour would reshape everyone's understanding of power, prejudice, and the cost of institutional bias. Conference Room A occupied the southwest corner of Metropolitan Trust Bank's executive floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Atlanta's sprawling business district. The elevator ride to the executive floor had been conducted in tense silence, with Michael Barnes and Jennifer Walsh clearly struggling to understand how a routine customer service issue had escalated into a crisis, requiring the regional vice president's immediate attention. The room was designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure, with a mahogany conference table that could seat 20, leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and integrated technology that seamlessly connected to global financial networks. This was where the bank's most critical decisions were made, where billion-dollar deals were negotiated, and where careers were either made or destroyed. Maya Richardson entered this space with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place at such tables through merit rather than inheritance or connection. She chose a seat that positioned her with a clear view of everyone present while keeping her back to the windows. a subtle power move that demonstrated her understanding of boardroom dynamics. Michael Barnes hesitated near the door, clearly uncertain about his role in whatever was about to unfold, while Jennifer Walsh remained standing near the back, her earlier arrogance now replaced by the growing realization that she was about to face consequences she hadn't anticipated. Linda Brooks moved to the head of the table with the efficiency of someone who had spent the last 4 hours conducting a comprehensive damage assessment. Her laptop connected seamlessly to the room's presentation system, and her fingers moved with practiced precision as she prepared to deliver information that would fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of the morning's events. "Before we address today's specific incidents," Linda began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who controlled the bank's entire digital infrastructure, "I want everyone in this room to understand exactly who Maya Richardson is and what Richardson Cyber means to this institution." She clicked to her first slide, which displayed Richardson Cyber's corporate logo alongside Metropolitan Trust's official seal, connected by digital pathways that illustrated their technological integration. 18 months ago, following a competitive selection process that included IBM, Cisco, and Palantir, we awarded Richardson Cyber the most comprehensive cybersecurity contract in Metropolitan Trust's 127-year history. Michael Barnes felt something cold settle in his stomach as he processed this information. The woman he had dismissed as unsuitable for executive banking services wasn't just a client. She was apparently one of their most critical technology partners. Linda continued, her presentation methodically building a picture that grew more damning with each slide. "Richardson Cyber doesn't just provide security software for our institution. Maya's algorithms monitor every digital transaction we process, protect every customer login, and secure every wire transfer, including the billion-dollar transfers that Mr. Barnes suggested were beyond our standard protocols." The irony was devastating in its precision. Michael had questioned Maya's ability to conduct legitimate billion-dollar transactions, while standing in a building whose ability to process such transactions depended entirely on her technological expertise. "Furthermore," Linda said, advancing to a slide that showed real-time security monitoring dashboards, "Richardson Cyber's systems are so integrated into our infrastructure that Maya's physical presence in our building this morning triggered multiple security alerts. Our own algorithms flagged her proximity to our servers as a potential threat because her attempted wire transfer was denied, creating an unusual pattern that our AI interpreted as a possible insider attack." Jennifer Walsh made a small sound that might have been a whimper as she realized that her contemptuous dismissal of Maya's business credentials had literally triggered the bank's cybersecurity emergency protocols. Sarah Chen leaned forward, her expression grave as she addressed the elephant in the room. "What Linda is explaining, for those who may not fully grasp the implications, is that while our frontline staff was refusing to serve Ms. Richardson based on their assumptions about her appearance and legitimacy, our back-end systems were simultaneously screaming warnings about the presence of our most critical technology partner." Maya had remained silent throughout this presentation, watching the recognition dawn on faces around the table with the calm satisfaction of someone who had always known this moment would come. When Linda finished her presentation and the room fell silent, Maya finally spoke, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who held all the cards and was about to play them strategically. "Now that we've established my credentials," she said, opening her briefcase with deliberate precision, "perhaps we should discuss why I was really here this morning and what your employees' actions have potentially cost this institution." Maya Richardson opened her briefcase with the deliberate precision of someone revealing evidence in a courtroom, each document placed on the mahogany table with calculated effect. The first item she withdrew was a thick folder bound in federal blue, its cover bearing the seal of the Department of Homeland Security and classification markings that immediately caught Linda Brooks's attention. "This," Maya said, her voice carrying the weight of national significance, "is the federal cybersecurity implementation contract that brought me to your branch this morning. The $1.8 billion wire transfer that Mr. Barnes deemed suspicious and potentially fraudulent is actually the initial funding for a DHS initiative to revolutionize cybersecurity protocols across all federally insured financial institutions." She opened the folder, revealing pages of dense technical specifications security clearance documentation, and implementation timelines that painted a picture of a project whose scope extended far beyond anything Metropolitan Trust typically handled. Michael Barnes leaned forward despite himself, his eyes scanning the official letterhead and realizing that his assumptions about Maya's legitimacy had been not just wrong, but catastrophically so. The pilot program, Maya continued, uses Metropolitan Trust as the primary testing ground because of our existing successful partnership. Every algorithm, every security protocol, every threat detection system being implemented nationwide will be based on technologies that are already protecting this institution's daily operations. Sarah Chen felt her chest tighten as she understood the implications. Maya, please tell me that this morning's misunderstanding hasn't jeopardized our federal partnerships. Maya's expression remained carefully neutral, but her silence spoke volumes. She withdrew a second document, this one bearing the logo of the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council, and placed it beside the first. This is a compliance timeline that requires all pilot institutions to demonstrate full implementation of new cybersecurity protocols by the end of this quarter. Any delays in funding, implementation, or partnership agreements could result in the loss of federal deposit insurance for participating institutions. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the executives processed this information. Loss of federal deposit insurance would effectively end Metropolitan Trust's ability to operate as a bank, transforming what had seemed like a customer service failure into an existential threat to the institution's survival. Jennifer Walsh, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally found her voice. "But how were we supposed to know?" she asked, her tone carrying a desperate edge. She didn't look like... her clothes, her bag, her age, nothing about her suggested... Suggested what exactly? Maya asked, turning her full attention to Jennifer for the first time since entering the conference room. That I couldn't be a legitimate technology executive. That someone who looks like me couldn't possibly run a company capable of securing billions of dollars in federal contracts? The question hung in the air like an indictment, forcing everyone present to confront the unconscious biases that had shaped their assumptions. Jennifer's face flushed with shame as she realized that her prejudices had been not just morally wrong but professionally devastating. Michael Barnes attempted to salvage the situation with corporate speak. "Ms. Richardson, I want to assure you that our policies are designed to protect all clients equally. If there was any misunderstanding about proper procedures..." "Mr. Barnes?" Maya interrupted, her voice cutting through his attempt at deflection with surgical precision. "There was no misunderstanding about procedures. Your staff examined my appearance, made assumptions about my legitimacy based on those visual cues, and refused to provide standard banking services that I am contractually entitled to receive." She withdrew a final document from her briefcase, a copy of Metropolitan Trust's own diversity, equity and inclusion policy, which prominently featured commitments to fair treatment regardless of race, age or appearance. This is your institution's own DEI policy, which explicitly prohibits the kind of discriminatory treatment I received this morning. The irony is that while your frontline staff was violating your stated values, your back-end systems were proving how much this institution depends on the expertise of people who don't fit your unconscious assumptions about what success looks like. Maya Richardson stood and moved to the presentation screen, her movements carrying the authority of someone about to deliver information that would reshape everything the room's occupants thought they understood about power, competence, and institutional dependency. With Linda Brooks' permission, she connected her own laptop to the system, and the screen filled with a real-time dashboard that made several people gasp audibly. "This," Maya said, gesturing to the flowing data streams and security metrics cascading across the display, "is what Metropolitan Trust Bank looks like from the inside. Every number you see, every security protocol monitoring your operations, every algorithm protecting your customers' assets, all of it runs on code that I personally wrote and maintain." The dashboard was mesmerizing in its complexity and scope. Real-time transaction monitoring showed thousands of customer interactions happening simultaneously, all filtered through Richardson Cyber's threat detection systems. Network security protocols displayed the bank's digital infrastructure like a living organism, with Maya's algorithms serving as its immune system, constantly identifying and neutralizing potential threats. Your morning operations, Maya continued, highlighting specific data points, processed $847 million in transactions. Every single one was secured by Richardson Cyber's encryption protocols. Your online banking platform authenticated 23,147 customer logins since midnight. Every authentication was verified through my company's identity management systems. Michael Barnes watched the numbers with growing horror as he began to understand the true scope of Maya's integration into their operations. This wasn't just a vendor relationship, it was complete technological dependency. Maya advanced to the next screen, which showed the bank's vulnerability assessments and threat responses over the previous 18 months. Since implementing Richardson Cyber's security suite, Metropolitan Trust has prevented 1,147 attempted cyber attacks, including 17 that would have been catastrophic to your operations. The estimated value of assets protected by our systems exceeds $50 billion. Sarah Chen felt her hands trembling as she realized that the woman her employees had dismissed as unqualified was literally the only thing standing between Metropolitan Trust and digital annihilation. Every day, Maya's systems prevented attacks that could destroy the institution, and yet Jennifer Walsh had thrown her business card in the trash because it didn't look expensive enough. But here's what makes this morning's events particularly significant, Maya said, her tone shifting to something more ominous. She clicked to a new screen that showed administrative access logs and system controls. As the primary architect of your cybersecurity infrastructure, I maintain administrative access to all critical systems. This access is necessary for real-time threat response, system updates, and emergency protocols. The implications hit Linda Brooks first. Maya, you're not suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything, Maya replied calmly. I'm simply explaining the reality of our technological relationship. When your staff refused to process my wire transfer and suggested I take my business elsewhere, they were essentially telling the person who controls your digital infrastructure to leave and find another bank. She clicked to a final screen that showed Richardson Cyber's contract termination procedures. According to our service agreement, either party can terminate this relationship with 30 days' notice. Given this morning's treatment, and the clear indication that Metropolitan Trust no longer values our partnership, perhaps it's time to consider whether this relationship serves either of our interests. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room understood that Maya held the power to essentially shut down Metropolitan Trust's digital operations, not through malicious attack, but simply by withdrawing the services that kept them functioning. The federal contracts, the customer transactions, the regulatory compliance, all of it depended on the expertise of the woman Jennifer Walsh had dismissed as a fraud. Jennifer Walsh finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Maya turned to face her directly, her expression neither angry nor vindictive, but carrying the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime being underestimated. Miss Walsh, the problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is that you made assumptions about who I couldn't be based on how I looked. And those assumptions nearly cost your institution everything. The conference room fell into a silence so profound that the only sound was the barely audible hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant murmur of Atlanta traffic 30 floors below. Sarah Chen sat frozen in her leather chair, her mind racing through the immediate implications of what Maya had just revealed. As regional vice president, she understood that the next decisions made in this room would determine not just the careers of everyone present, but potentially the survival of Metropolitan Trust Bank as a viable financial institution. Linda Brooks was the first to break the paralysis, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard as she pulled up Richardson Cyber's contract terms and termination clauses. Her face grew progressively paler as she read through provisions that she had never imagined might become relevant. 30 days' notice for termination of services, with no requirement to maintain systems during the transition period. The implications were staggering. Metropolitan Trust could be left completely vulnerable to cyber attacks while scrambling to find replacement services that might not even exist. Maya, Sarah said finally, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone negotiating for her institution's life, I want to personally apologize for the treatment you received this morning. What happened was inexcusable, and it doesn't represent the values that Metropolitan Trust claims to uphold. Michael Barnes, who had remained silent since the full scope of his mistake became clear, finally found his voice. "Ms. Richardson, I take full responsibility for my actions this morning. I failed to follow proper procedures, and I allowed my personal biases to influence my professional judgment. I understand if you feel that our working relationship is no longer viable." Maya studied Michael's face, noting the genuine distress in his expression. She had seen this transformation countless times before, the moment when someone realized that their prejudices had real consequences, when unconscious bias collided with professional reality in ways that couldn't be explained away or minimized. Jennifer Walsh had begun crying quietly, her shoulders shaking as she processed the magnitude of her morning's actions. The business card she had thrown away with such contempt represented not just a person she had disrespected, but the technological foundation that allowed her to do her job every day. Every transaction she processed, every customer she served, every security protocol that protected the bank, all of it depended on the expertise of the woman she had dismissed as a fraud. "Ms. Walsh," Maya said, her tone surprisingly gentle, "I want you to understand something important. This isn't about punishment or revenge. This is about recognition, recognizing that expertise comes in many forms, and that competence isn't determined by appearance, age, or the cost of someone's handbag." Linda Brooks looked up from her laptop, her expression grim. "Maya, I've been reviewing our contingency plans for critical vendor relationships. The truth is we don't have adequate backup systems for the level of integration Richardson Cyber provides. If you were to terminate our contract, we would be operating with 1990s-level cybersecurity within 30 days. The weight of that admission settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Metropolitan Trust Bank, with its gleaming marble lobby and billion-dollar assets, would be essentially defenseless against modern cyber threats without Maya's protection. The irony was devastating. They had dismissed their own technological lifeline based on superficial judgments about her worthiness. Maya closed her laptop and returned to her seat, her movements deliberate and measured. "I didn't come here today to destroy Metropolitan Trust Bank," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who held all the cards and knew exactly how to play them. "I came here to complete a wire transfer for a federal contract that will benefit both our organizations. But what happened this morning has shown me that we have a much more fundamental problem to solve." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "The question isn't whether Richardson Cyber will continue protecting your institution. The question is whether Metropolitan Trust Bank is willing to confront the biases that led to this situation and take meaningful action to ensure it never happens again." The gauntlet had been thrown. Maya Richardson had just offered Metropolitan Trust Bank a choice: genuine transformation or technological abandonment. The next few minutes would determine which path they chose. Sarah Chen stood up from the conference table, her movement commanding immediate attention from everyone in the room. As regional vice president, she had the authority to make decisions that would reshape careers and institutional policies, and the gravity of that responsibility was evident in every line of her posture. "Maya, before we discuss the future of our partnership, I want to address the immediate consequences of this morning's events," Sarah said, her voice carrying the formal tone of executive judgment. "What happened today was not just a failure of customer service. It was a violation of our institutional values and a betrayal of the trust you've placed in our organization." She turned to face Michael Barnes, whose earlier confidence had been completely stripped away by the revelation of his catastrophic misjudgment. "Michael, effective immediately, you are being removed from your position as branch manager. You will be reassigned to our corporate training department, where you will spend the next 6 months developing and implementing anti-bias training protocols for all customer-facing staff." Michael's face went ashen, but he nodded acceptance of his demotion without protest. He understood that keeping any position at all was more lenient treatment than his actions probably deserved. Sarah's attention shifted to Jennifer Walsh, who had stopped crying but remained visibly shaken by the magnitude of her mistake. "Jennifer, your employment with Metropolitan Trust Bank is terminated, effective immediately. Your actions this morning demonstrated a level of discriminatory behavior that is incompatible with our values and potentially damaging to our business relationships." Jennifer nodded silently, understanding that her contemptuous dismissal of Maya had cost her not just her job, but likely her career in banking. Word of this incident would spread quickly through Atlanta's financial community, making it nearly impossible for her to find similar employment elsewhere. Linda Brooks had been taking notes throughout the meeting, and she now addressed the room with the systematic approach of someone implementing crisis management protocols. I will be conducting a comprehensive review of all customer service interactions involving Richardson Cyber over the past 18 months. We need to understand if today's incident represents an isolated failure or part of a broader pattern of discriminatory treatment. Maya listened to these immediate consequences with satisfaction, tempered by something deeper, the recognition that punishment alone wouldn't solve the underlying problems that had created this situation. I appreciate these actions, she said, but I want to suggest something more comprehensive. She stood and moved to the whiteboard at the front of the conference room, picking up a marker with the natural authority of someone accustomed to leading presentations. The federal contract I'm implementing isn't just about cybersecurity technology. It's about creating secure, inclusive financial systems that serve all Americans fairly. Part of that initiative includes mandatory bias recognition training for all staff at participating institutions. Maya began writing on the whiteboard, outlining a comprehensive program that went far beyond standard diversity training. I propose that Metropolitan Trust Bank become the pilot institution for this training program. Every employee, from tellers to executives, would participate in intensive workshops designed to help them recognize and overcome unconscious bias in customer interactions. Sarah Chen felt a spark of hope as she realized that Maya was offering them a path toward redemption rather than simply punishment. What would this program involve? Real-world scenarios based on actual discrimination incidents, including what happened this morning, Maya replied, continuing to write. Role-playing exercises that help staff understand how their assumptions affect customer experiences, and ongoing monitoring systems that track customer satisfaction across demographic lines to identify patterns of differential treatment. Linda Brooks leaned forward with interest. You're suggesting we use our own failure as a teaching tool? Exactly, Maya confirmed. The most powerful learning comes from honest examination of our mistakes. What happened today was inexcusable, but it can also become the foundation for meaningful change if we're willing to be transparent about what went wrong and why. Maya turned back to face the room, her expression carrying both challenge and opportunity. Metropolitan Trust Bank can either become known as the institution that discriminated against its own cybersecurity architect, or it can become the model for how financial institutions confront and overcome institutional bias. The choice is yours. 3 weeks after the confrontation in Conference Room A, Metropolitan Trust Bank bore little resemblance to the institution where Maya Richardson had been so callously dismissed. The transformation had been swift, comprehensive, and visible to anyone who walked through the gleaming marble lobby that had once been a theater of discrimination. The most obvious change was in the staff themselves. Gone was the casual arrogance that had allowed Jennifer Walsh to throw a CEO's business card in the trash, replaced by a heightened awareness that every customer interaction carried potential consequences that extended far beyond individual transactions. New employee badges prominently displayed Metropolitan Trust's updated mission statement, "Excellence in service through inclusive excellence," a phrase that Maya had helped develop during her role as consultant for the bank's cultural transformation. Sarah Chen had embraced the pilot program with the zeal of someone who recognized that her institution's survival depended on meaningful change. The comprehensive bias recognition training had become mandatory for all employees, with quarterly refresher courses and ongoing assessments that tied customer satisfaction scores directly to performance evaluations. But more importantly, the training had been designed by Maya herself, ensuring that it addressed the specific types of assumptions and prejudices that had led to her mistreatment. The program's centerpiece was a case study module that examined the events of that Tuesday morning in excruciating detail. New employees watched security footage of Maya's initial interaction with Jennifer Walsh, analyzed the decision-making process that led to her dismissal, and explored alternative approaches that would have recognized her expertise and authority from the beginning. It was uncomfortable, even painful, but it was also undeniably effective. Linda Brooks had implemented technological solutions alongside the human training, developing algorithms that monitored customer service interactions for potential bias indicators. The system tracked everything from wait times and service quality to the tone and language used by staff members, creating data patterns that could identify discriminatory treatment before it escalated into major incidents. The technology doesn't replace human judgment, Linda explained during a presentation to the American Banking Association, but it provides objective data that helps us recognize when our unconscious biases might be influencing our professional decisions. Michael Barnes, now working in the training department, had thrown himself into his new role with the passion of someone seeking redemption through meaningful work. His personal experience of making catastrophic assumptions about Maya's capabilities had given him unique insight into how unconscious bias operated in banking environments. "I used to think I was good at assessing customers," he told groups of trainees during sensitivity workshops. "I prided myself on being able to identify serious clients versus time wasters. What I learned is that my assessment criteria were based on superficial factors that had nothing to do with actual creditworthiness or business legitimacy." The program's success had attracted attention from federal regulators, who were considering making similar training mandatory for all federally insured financial institutions. Maya's original cybersecurity contract had evolved into something much broader, a comprehensive initiative to address systemic bias in financial services while simultaneously improving digital security protocols. But perhaps the most significant change was in the bank's culture itself. The casual assumptions that had once allowed staff to dismiss customers based on appearance had been replaced by a systematic approach to recognizing expertise and authority in all its forms. Customer satisfaction scores had improved dramatically, particularly among minority clients who had previously experienced subtle forms of discrimination. Maya had become a regular presence at the bank, not just as a technology consultant, but as a visible reminder of the expertise that exists in unexpected forms. Her office on the building's executive floor served as both a practical workspace and a symbolic statement about Metropolitan Trust's commitment to inclusive excellence. The transformation wasn't complete. Institutional change of this magnitude required years rather than weeks, but the foundation had been established. Metropolitan Trust Bank was becoming living proof that financial institutions could confront their biases, acknowledge their failures, and emerge stronger and more equitable as a result. Most importantly, it was working. Other regional banks had begun requesting consultations about implementing similar programs, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond a single institution's walls. 6 months after that transformative Tuesday morning, Maya Richardson stood before a packed auditorium at the Federal Financial Institutions Conference in Washington, D.C., preparing to deliver the keynote address that would define her legacy far beyond the world of cybersecurity. The audience included bank presidents, federal regulators, technology executives, and civil rights advocates, a diverse coalition united by their recognition that the intersection of technology and institutional bias represented one of the most critical challenges facing modern financial services. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark, "I want to share with you a simple question that has the power to transform how we serve our communities. What if we trusted expertise the moment we encountered it, regardless of what it looked like?" The question hung in the air with the same power it had carried in that Atlanta conference room, but now it was being heard by decision-makers who could implement change across thousands of institutions serving millions of customers. Maya's presentation wove together the technical achievements of the Federal Cybersecurity Initiative with the human transformation that had occurred at Metropolitan Trust Bank. She showed data demonstrating how bias recognition training had improved both customer satisfaction and security compliance, creating a powerful business case for institutional change that went far beyond moral arguments. "The morning I was discriminated against at Metropolitan Trust Bank," she continued, "I realized that all the cybersecurity technology in the world couldn't protect financial institutions from their greatest vulnerability, the assumptions they make about who deserves their respect and service." In the audience, Sarah Chen watched with pride as Maya described the comprehensive transformation that had made Metropolitan Trust Bank a model for inclusive excellence in financial services. The pilot program had exceeded every expectation, generating measurable improvements in customer satisfaction, employee retention, and regulatory compliance, while simultaneously strengthening the institution's cybersecurity infrastructure. But Maya's impact had extended far beyond a single bank, or even a single industry. The Code for Change mentorship program she had launched now served over 200 young women of color interested in technology careers, providing not just technical training, but also the confidence and networks necessary to succeed in fields where they were traditionally underrepresented. "We've created something unprecedented," Maya explained to the audience. "A technology initiative that strengthens both digital security and social equity simultaneously. When financial institutions recognize and value expertise in all its forms, they become more secure, more profitable, and more trusted by the communities they serve." The program's success had attracted investment from major technology companies and support from civil rights organizations, creating a sustainable model for change that could be replicated across industries. What had begun as a response to discrimination had evolved into a blueprint for building more inclusive and effective institutions. Maya's presentation concluded with video testimonials from program participants, young women who had found careers in cybersecurity, banking executives who had discovered blind spots in their customer service approaches, and community leaders who had witnessed the transformation of institutions that had once seemed impermeable to change. As the applause filled the auditorium, Maya felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that her expertise had been used not just to solve technical problems, but to address the human assumptions that created those problems in the first place. The woman who had once been dismissed as unqualified for basic banking services had become a nationally recognized leader in both cybersecurity and institutional reform. The federal program she had designed was now being implemented in over 1,000 financial institutions across the country, creating a new standard for inclusive excellence that protected both digital assets and human dignity. And perhaps most importantly, the question she had posed that day in Washington about trusting expertise regardless of its appearance had become a rallying cry for leaders across industries who recognized that diversity and security were not competing priorities, but complementary strengths. Maya Richardson had transformed a moment of discrimination into a movement for change, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to bias is not anger or revenge, but the quiet determination to build something better for everyone who would come after.